So welcome to our final Caput Center Colloquium for the academic year. I am delighted to introduce today's speaker, who I first met a couple years ago when he helped me understand that just building a pollinator garden is not enough to protect the bees that need protecting. Dr. Gegear is a professor in the Department of Biology at UMass Dartmouth. He's been studying neuroecology and conservation of pollination systems native to North America for over 25 years. His research has been supported by multiple federal grants and has been published in books, journals, and popular press articles. Dr. Gegear was awarded the 2018 Regional Impact Award by the Native Plant Trust for his community-based work related to wild pollinator conservation. And now we have a chance to learn more about his Beecology Project, a citizen science effort to collect data on threatened pollinator species in New England. And he has let us know that he is happy to take questions as we go, if people would like to ask him questions as we go. And I will turn it over to Robert. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Finally, I think this was rescheduled. Let me just share my video.
We were only off by 2 years.
That's right. Well, yeah, it was a crazy 2 years. So today I'm going to talk about BioCS Bridge project, which focuses on the development of high school curricula that fully integrates science and computational thinking. The project is in collaboration with 3 faculty from Worcester Polytechnic Institute. Liz Ryder and Carolina Ruiz are in computer science and bioinformatics and computational biology. And Sherry Weaver is a part of the STEM Education Center. So I arrived at UMass Dartmouth in 2019, so this project was started prior to my arrival, but I'm hoping that some of the things that I'm talking about today will generate some new collaborations with UMass Dartmouth faculty. So the BioCS Bridge is an extension of my Beecology project, and my Beecology project is an extension of my research. So as I'm the bio part of the BioCS Bridge, biological research is my specialty, so it's certainly not STEM education. And so I thought that I would start off by, let me back up a bit. So my research serves as the framework for both the Beecology Project and the BioCS Bridge. And so I thought I would start by talking about some of the biology, so you get a good understanding of what the problem is and understanding of the framework before I move into the educational side of things. So as was mentioned, my research focuses on the ecology, evolution, and conservation of plant pollinator systems. And the conservation of plant pollinator systems represents a real world global problem. So what is a plant pollinator system? Well, there are a wide variety of animals that visit flowers to feed on the nectar or pollen or both. So then you can think of the nectar as their source of fuel, high in carbohydrates. The pollen is a source of protein. And globally, there are about 200,000 of these species, the vast majority of which are insects. So out of the 200,000 species, only about 1,000 are vertebrates, like the hummingbird shown here. And insects that you may see on flowers include, moths and butterflies, of course, the bees that get a lot of attention, but also flies and wasps and beetles are important pollinators of many plant species. If we look in the background, we see that this is a typical environment that these flower visiting animals encounter. A lot of things in bloom, and it's up to those individuals to decide which ones are the best source of nectar or pollen. And they need to track those resources and changes in those resources over time and space. And you can imagine that there are thousands of these individuals that are scrambling to get as much nectar as they can. So there's very strong competition going on. The way that these animals figure out which ones are the best, a lot of people think insects, small brains, everything is programmed, but it turns out that only a small proportion of their behavior is programmed. Most of it is based on learning, memory, and decision making. So a lot of what I do, my background is in psychology, neurobiology, and ecology and evolution. My research sort of mixes those disciplines together. And so what we can do to figure these things out in the lab is we can test for these innate preferences. So here's a monarch butterfly in a harness. Doesn't harm the butterfly. You touch the legs of the butterfly with a cotton swab soaked in sucrose solution, and it immediately sticks out its tongue. So it's a reflexive response, very similar to Pavlov and his dogs. What we can do is present the monarch with a stimulus. So in this case, it's color yellow. We could do odors, we could do shapes. We've done combinations of odors and shapes and colors, simulating what's going on in their natural environment. Touch the legs after a couple of seconds, the tongue starts to ingest the sucrose solution, and immediately their brains form an association between the color and reward. It's not innate, because if it was an innate response, we would see it sticking out its tongue looking for reward when we show it the color initially. So we show, during the testing phase, we show blue, which is other colors, some colors similar to the test color, like the orange, and then eventually we show it with the test color, and immediately it sticks out its proboscis, and its antenna go down, and it starts looking for that sucrose reward. So this is simple associative learning. So these butterflies, even though they have a brain the size of a pinhead, in addition to being able to go to Mexico every year without ever having done so before, are able to very quickly form these associations and then use them to guide their foraging decisions. And they can learn and relearn different color odor associations readily. And this is true of all insects. The flies, the bees are all doing this and using that information to try to get the edge on other individuals when they're foraging. So that's the animal side of the equation. Now, if these animals, while they're collecting pollen or visiting for nectar, are very sloppy and they happen to transfer pollen from one flower to another, leading to fertilization from the plant side of things, the production of seeds and fruit, then our flower visitor turns into a pollinator. So the term pollinator is a plant-based term, not an animal-based term, and it has to do with plant reproduction. So flowering plants reproduce through the transfer of pollen to the surface of the stigma, which is the female reproductive structure. And so the plants are the other side of this equation. And so the plants are trying to get animals to help them to reproduce, and the animals are looking for good sources of food. From the plant's perspective, the ideal animal would be one that takes the pollen from one individual and transfers it to another individual of the same species. This is called outcrossing. If they transfer pollen to flowers of the same species, it's like they're mating with themselves, and there are some issues with that. And so plants have evolved mechanisms to try to get them to move to other plants. In addition, if our individual decides to go from this plant to another species, what happens is that the pollen or the male gametes are effectively wasted, and it blocks the surface of the stigma, that female reproductive structure, and prevents it from receiving its own pollen. And so there are significant costs from the plant side of things. And I want to note that the plant reproduction is at the mercy of the animal foraging decisions. The animals dictate plant reproduction. So there's strong selection on plants to get the animals to do what they want. And that's why we have so much floral display diversity. Flowers look and smell differently because that's the way that the plants target the animals that they need for pollination. Okay. And so when you look at the plants and pollinator and all of its pollinators together, this forms what's called a pollination system. And there are a wide variety of these systems. Some plants are targeting small bees, like this Zizia, which is starting to bloom right now. Some plants are targeting large-bodied bees, like this penstemon. You can see the pollen's deposited on the back of the bee here. So as it enters the flower to get the nectar, it brushes up against the female reproductive structures, which are up here. Some are pollinated by hummingbirds primarily. So here the pollen's transferred to the forehead of the hummingbird, because if the plant transferred it to the wings, it wouldn't be very efficient. The female reproductive organs here. So as the bird moves in to get the nectar at the base of the flower, it's going to transfer the pollen to the female reproductive structure. Some are highly specialized. So here we have one species pollinated by one animal species. The nectar is located at the base of a tube, which is off the slide, and this fly has a tongue that matches the tube length. And here's the pollen located in the sac. If this species goes extinct, this plant species immediately goes extinct. And similarly, if this plant species goes extinct, the fly goes extinct. So it's a one-to-one. And here's an example of a butterfly pollination system. You can see the pollen on the proboscis of the butterfly. So we have a wide variety of these pollination systems, different plants that are producing seeds and fruit. Now, the problem is, so this is where the global problem comes in, that a lot of these systems are being degraded, and these systems are being degraded globally. So in Massachusetts, I've done a lot of work looking at bumblebee pollinators, the black and yellow fuzzy ones. Before 2000 is in blue, before 2000s in yellow, after 2000s take that back. Before 2000s in blue, and post 2000 is in yellow. And you can see that in many cases, the blue bars are, the yellow bars are lower than the blue bars, which indicating decline. In some cases, I didn't find the species. So this one, Bombus affinis, is on the endangered species list and is locally extinct. The same is going on with the butterflies. All these species down here below the line are declining, and the same is true for our native plants. Not surprisingly, the native plants in decline, like this Penstemon hirsutus, have pollinators that are also in decline. So the whole systems are being degraded. I want to point out that there are also species here where we see that there are cases where the yellow bars are higher than the blue bars, and all of these butterfly species are increasing. We have native plants increasing. So everything isn't in trouble. There are some species that are headed in the direction of local extinction, while as others, whatever we're doing to drive some to extinction, others are increasing in number and expanding their ranges. The reason that we should care about this, obviously the loss of species is important, and this issue gets a lot of attention from the agricultural side of things because a lot of what we eat is the product of animal pollination. But looking more at the ecological side, the reason that these pollination systems and the diversity of these systems is so important is because they provide, you could think of them like the foundation for ecosystems. They're building blocks of biodiversity. So the seeds and fruit that are produced through the pollination of plants is providing food for small mammals and birds, and the small mammals and birds are providing food to the predatory, or food for the predatory species. So as we start to erode these relationships, there's less food, and at this level, which is producing less food on this level. Plant material also provides shelter and nesting sites for a lot of animals as well. So eventually we're going to reduce this to the point where we're going to get a massive reduction in biodiversity, or what's called ecosystem collapse. And the reason that this is important is because healthy, diverse ecosystems provide us with a lot of what are called ecosystem services. These are things we get from nature for free, like carbon sequestration and soil decomposition. And so when we lose these services, we would need to invent them, which there's a hefty price tag associated with that if we can pull it off at all. And so this side of things is really has really been neglected compared to the agricultural side. So crop pollination and honeybees. Honeybees are non-native and they don't play any role in what's going on here. It's a whole different side of things. This side's been neglected, and my research is trying to figure out what's going on and stop this ecosystem collapse from happening. So how is it that we figure out what's going on in these systems? So my ecological approach is to look at what each species that's in, figure out the species that are in decline, and then figure out what those species need to persist. What do they need to complete their life cycle? In the case of the butterfly species in decline, they need host plants, right? They need somewhere to lay their eggs that their larvae eat, and then they pupate, and then as adults, they need sources of nectar. Right? That's their source of energy, that's their fuel. In bees, they need a place to overwinter. They need nesting sites. And once they find nesting sites, they need good sources of nectar and pollen. In the case of bees need pollen to make new bees, and they need the nectar to keep going. As I said, that's their energy. A bumblebee won't last 24 hours without a source of carbohydrate. The plants obviously need their pollinators, and so we need to figure out who are the main pollinators of the plant species that are in trouble. And so there's shockingly little information about what these species need. And this is really hindered conservation efforts. People are guessing what these animals need, and guess what? They're guessing incorrectly. And what that's doing is helping the common species at the cost of the species in decline. In fact, a lot of what's going on when it comes to pollinator conservation now is actually increasing or speeding up decline rather than helping. And it's because people, for whatever reason, don't have this species level approach. So to figure out what they need, we need data that we currently don't have. And so in 2015, so I was at UMass Medical School working on monarch butterfly migration. And my advisor at the time told me that I couldn't even say the word pollinator or bee in the lab. And so, the decline started around 2000. So I was kind of behind a little bit. And so I needed to speed up data collection. So I went out and found some study sites to start to collect data on bumblebee flower interactions to figure out what kind of flowers the species at risk like and which species they need. And so here's one of my study sites in Breakneck Hill in Southborough, Massachusetts. It's about 40 acres. And from June through October, once a week, I'll walk back and forth across the 40 acres and survey all of the interactions that I see. And I've done this with 4 sites at low elevation and 4 sites with high elevation. Now, just this is a lot of work for one individual. I have a grad student involved, but it's still covering the state and getting the data we need quickly is very difficult to do as a single individual. And so what I thought was there were a lot of people that were interested in this pollinator decline issue or the degradation of pollination systems. And so I thought I would get these, it would be a great idea to get these people to help. And so I created the Beecology Citizen Science Project. So at the time, the main focus, the main goal of the project was to collect these ecological data on the foraging behavior of the bumblebee species at risk. And since that time, because of the success of the project, I've added 2 goals, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So what I did was I told the citizen scientists to go out and take a short video, 10-second video of a bumblebee interacting with a flower and send it to me. And, there was a great response and I got a lot of videos. I have a Google Drive filled with videos and I had to go through each video and collect the data. And that was taking up probably as much time as me just going out and collecting the data myself. And I thought there must be a more efficient way of doing this. And that's when I teamed up with Liz Ryder and Carolina Ruiz in computer science at WPI and said, look, can you help me? It would be great if I had an app to so the citizen scientists could take the videos and then extract the information themselves and then get it to the database without me having to be involved. And they said, sure, that sounds like a great project for undergraduate students. And so they got a team of undergraduates to create the Beecology web app. So the web app is different from conventional apps in that you don't have to go to the app store to download it. All you need is a working browser, and you go to the website and you can download the app to your phone or mobile device. And you can start using the app as soon as it downloads. You can even be offline and you can still use the app. And then once you get back to get back online, it will transfer the data at that point. So here's, the app. Basically what you do is you upload a video and you can capture individual frames. The app asks you questions about the bee. So starting with the abdomen down here, what's the color pattern, you match it, and then goes to thorax and the head. And you can scrub the video back and forth and get the information that you need. It then takes you to identify the plant. It then takes location and date information and sends it to our central database. And then I can look at it and I can correct it if needed. So this was a great system. And so that was for bumblebees. And just this year, a couple of weeks ago, because of the success of the bumblebee data, we've now expanded the app to include butterfly flower interactions or butterfly interactions. They could be interacting, either collecting nectar, butterflies might be laying eggs, so ovipositing on the plants. And what we did was we were able to take the iNaturalist API, so the key components of how iNaturalist IDs plant species through Seek or some of their apps, and we were able to bring it into our app. So now they can upload butterfly videos and go to iNaturalist to ID for them, go to the plant and upload a picture to get iNaturalist to ID it for them, and then take that information and send it to the database. So we're very excited about this new functionality. And it's going to go through some growing pains, I'm sure, but I've already got the ecologists out collecting butterfly videos. All of the data that I collected and on bumblebees and that I will be collecting went into this plant list that I have that's available on my website. And so all of the plants on this list are preferred by the bee or butterfly species of conservation concern. So the list is based on almost 20,000 observations of bumblebee flower interactions. It's all data driven. As I get new data, the list changes. So there are a few new additions to 2022. And eventually I'm going to incorporate the butterfly data that I have right now. I'm putting together guesses about plants that may match up with some of these butterfly, support some of these butterfly species based on the literature. But again, as I said, it's limited. And so, from my perspective, from a research perspective, the Beecology Citizen Science Project in terms of data collection has been a tremendous success. There's been over 4,500 observations to date from citizen scientists. And I thought, that this is great, but I think that they were telling me that they wanted to do more. They wanted to learn more about the scientific process. And so I started to, I created two new goals, and that is for the project, and that is to teach citizen scientists how to assess habitat quality so that they can go into a garden, or they can go into a conservation land and know what to look for, how to assess the quality in terms of species of conservation concern. And then also get them to use the data from my plant list and start to create habitats that we would then study at a later date to look what impact they're having in terms of restoring these plant pollinator systems of conservation concern. And so the second goal of Beecology, which I started a couple of years ago, is really science education. I teach participants how to learn the scientific process. And so part of that is understanding what to look for. So I teach them how to use the app. I teach them what the bee species look like. Here's a picture here of me giving one of my workshops. I give, anywhere 15 to 20 of these a year at various locations across the state. And so, what this does is it empowers the citizen scientists. They're not just collecting data, not understanding what's going on. They really become a part of the scientific process. So they can be the change, but they can also see the change, because they know when they make a change to the environment that they see these species of conservation concern. And the science that's going on here is they assess a habitat, they then implement change. So they take some of the plants from my list, put them in the environment, and then they have the tools to reassess the effect that they're having. They can see that it's helping. They can see that or assess whether what they've done has actually helped the conservation efforts. And this has really helped my research move forward, because they see that they made a change, and that motivates them to tell others. And there's a lot going on. I don't have a lot of time to go into that today. But just to give you an idea, a lot of these groups have created these habitats, and in just 1 year, they've seen success. So in Dartmouth, I've got one of these habitats, and in Southborough, we had a group of volunteers during COVID that put together a habitat. And at the bottom here are all pictures of the bumblebee species of conservation concern that were found on the plants in the habitat. And in Southborough, there's 40 acres, as I mentioned. Sometimes I don't see any of these species over 40 acres. And you can see that this is a relatively small area, and I would see 4 or 5 of these species on this site in the first year. So it's been a tremendous success. And these habitats are popping up across the state. A lot of people are excited and putting these in. So, very excited about where things are headed. And so as a part of this process, then we're collecting all these data. I felt it was important that these citizen scientists could access the data, or researchers from other institutions could use the data that these citizen scientists have collected. Because if we look at the data they've collected, it's high quality data. What I'm seeing through my intensive field surveys is the same as what these citizen scientists are collecting. And so I again talked to Carolina Ruiz and Liz Ryder from WPI and said, let's create a central hub. So that's the Beecology website, and let's start to put information so that we can transfer things from participation into more science education. And so if you go to the Beecology website, there's a lot of information on the issues, a lot of the stuff I've already covered in this talk. But also we've enabled or provided options for users to select data and download the data and then either use the data themselves or, as you'll see, to visualize the data. So this is a location tool, so you can highlight a region wherever you are across the state. You can download based on year, based on month, based on bee species. So there are a lot of options to filter and to use the data. Downloads it into an Excel sheet, which you can use and then create pivot tables or whatever you want to visualize the data. In case you don't want to do that, we also had students develop a bunch of visualization tools. Again, you download the data and you click on one of these tools. Each one of these options has a video tutorial telling you what you need to do and what the purpose of each of the tools is. And so you could look at where species were collected. So a location tool map. Each of the colors represents a different bumblebee species. A diversity map. So where is bumblebee diversity the highest? You can look at different times. And also this floral network tool. So as I mentioned, we're collecting data on bumblebee flower interactions. This will show you all those interaction data. You can click on a plant species to see the bumblebee species that have been observed on that plant, or you can click on a bumblebee species to see what it prefers. So a lot of different options for the citizen scientists to engage in the scientific process and use the data and analyze the data in their own their preferred way. So that's the Beecology, the citizen scientist, more community outreach portion of it. And hopefully you could see as we're moving through this, there are a lot of opportunities at the K through 12 for K through 12 education, right? The Webapp, the visualization tools that I just showed you, so as I mentioned, I give a lot of talks, and a lot of the talks that I've given, there have been high school teachers in attendance, and they said, hey, this would be great. Would you mind coming and give my class a demonstration of the Webapp? And so I did this at, this is just one example, Nipmuc Regional High School in Upton. And here's some students that you can see using their phones, using the app, looking at bees and getting those videos and using the Webapp. And we also had them use and teach them how to use the visualization tools. But what was interesting was that with this is Nipmuc also, so Liz Ryder, who works on computer modeling, was also working with a teacher at Nipmuc. And Liz and I have been working together for a while we have a grad student that we co-supervised that was working on what are called agent-based models. And they developed a virtual bumblebee plant pollination system. And so Liz, so what happened at Nipmuc was that I would bring the students out and teach them about, plant-pollinator interactions, get them to use the app. And then Liz would, we'd bring them to the school, and Liz would teach them how to model using the bee plant system as a framework. So what she did initially, so using two languages, Starlogo Nova, which is a very simple sort of click the different puzzle pieces into place and look at what that does. And so she had them go through different activities related and create these bee plant pollination systems virtually with the students based on what they observed in the field. In addition, I mentioned that we co-supervised a student. They created through NetLogo, which is more sophisticated and very hard to, or much more difficult to teach in a single class at the high school level. We already had these virtual systems created, shown here. Here's a bumblebee, and there are a bunch of different plant species. The bumblebees have memory. They learn which flowers are most rewarding, and there are a bunch of different outputs. And so Liz brought this simulation software and asked them questions and asked them to test different things about the effects of stressors such as pesticides and invasive species on these individual interactions and how those may affect populations. So we can see the populations based on the graphs on the right. And so I know through my research that pesticides affect brain function, and the bees, basically the bees are less intelligent. and they make really bad choices. And so what we can do is incorporate these effects into the model and see what the effects of pesticides would have on not just the bees, but their abilities as pollinators. So as these bees move through the environment, they transfer pollen, and the plant, that based on the pollen transfer, the plants reproduce. And we can look at multiple generations and see how that affects the population dynamics over time. So a lot of interaction, but the key here is that the system is being used as a framework to teach them how to program. So we're seeing that computer science and biology start to get integrated, and the students were extremely engaged. So were the teachers. There was a lot of positive feedback, and so we started to do more of these and eventually develop this Simbeecology Curricular module, where I would provide information on the biology, right, either through a lecture or I would take them out into the field, depending on what the school had available. And then Liz would take them in and teach them about agent-based modeling. So brainstorming based on what you learned about the biology, what would we have to put into a model? They could play around with the simulation and ask questions about if we reduce this bumblebee species, what effect might it have on plants? Generate data, they can test hypotheses. So all of this is incorporated into this curricular module. And so, I met with Liz and we got to think this is tremendously successful. And could we do more with the Beecology tools, right? We have a lot of computational tools, which I mentioned briefly. So could we bring those in to the high school as well? Or is there a need for this type of thing? And again, I'm coming at things from the biology, not STEM education. And so we met with Sherry Weaver, who's I mentioned is STEM Education Center at WPI. And she said, yes, actually, the next generation science standards really emphasize this computational thinking, bringing computational thinking into biology, and also from the computer science side of things, bringing in real world problems or using computer science to understand natural phenomena. So here's some examples of, some of those standards and, analyzing data sets, evaluating models, mathematical representations, and from the computer science, applying and designing techniques to solve problems, understand natural phenomena. So this seemed to fit perfectly with what I was doing at the community level. And so we thought, well, let's put this together and let's try to bring this into high school. And so again, we've got, on the one hand, we've got the high school biology, and on the other hand, we have the computer science. And so from the high school biology, we've got all of these key ideas: experimental design, hypothesis testing, biodiversity. And on the computer science side, based on the standards, we have these key terms or key concepts. And so we wanted to think, how is it that we would bridge those two things together in a way that would foster this integrative thinking in the student. And obviously, to get there, we have to do that. We have to figure out a way to get the teacher to think that way, so they could help us to develop the curriculum to then transform the student. And so that's when we developed the BioCS Bridge project. So it was the four of us, and what we did was, so we've got biology, which is basically myself, and then the computer science folks, STEM education. But we also brought in high school teachers, and we brought in students, college students, and as well as high school students into the development process. And I'll talk a little bit more about the transdisciplinary team in a second. But you can imagine that if you're a biology teacher and we give you computer science, that a lot of biology teachers may be reluctant to bring in the computer science because they don't have a computer science background. Similarly, computer science teachers may not have any biology background and be reluctant to bring in the biology side. So a lot of what's going on in this by transdisciplinary team, what we're doing is everybody gets on the same page. And that's just not with understanding the discipline, but also we're integrating level. Right. So as a faculty and plant-pollinator systems being my wheelhouse when it comes to research, we need high school students to bring it down to understand and bring things to and come to a compromise in terms of level to make it productive. And so that's what we mean by from the solitary teacher to the bio CS bridge team, where everybody knows about both sides, and we, you can think of it like a melting pot, that the curriculum that comes out is the product of all of these team members working together to synthesize and integrate. And so by this transdisciplinary team and the curriculum developed, that's what I mean. So the process then, as I mentioned, the first part of this is to get the high school teachers, either from the biology side or the computer science side, to understand each other's language, right? When you're in a different discipline, we had multiple meetings just so that people understood terminology. We spent a whole meeting, 3-hour meeting, discussing computational thinking. What is the definition of computational thinking? As a biologist, it means something to me, but as a computer science, the computer science faculty think about it a different way. So it's not just speaking the same language, looking at it at the level of high school teacher, but also as faculty, college faculty, we have to learn to speak each other's language as well. So there's vertical and horizontal integration. The horizontal from biology to computer science, and the vertical going from university through high school. And this is, in terms of the teamwork, there is a lot of back and forth, and you really need, the teachers learn to look at things from the other's perspective, and we're still collecting data on the outcome, but based on teacher comments, it's been very positive, and we certainly have, and I'll talk about this in a second, we've developed what we think is highly effective integrative curriculum. So looking back, or remembering back to the Beecology Project, we've got these biology components from more looking at the plant pollinator systems and decline, species decline. So asking questions, defining problems, all the way through to interpreting data from the biology side. And then we have to figure out how to integrate things from the computer science side over here into this process. And similarly, we've got our database, and we've got a lot that's connected to the database development from the computer science side. So how is that we can use the biology to inspire the development of these tools, or the development of or integrated curriculum that would involve computer science elements that go into these tools. And that's what we're looking at, this bridged bio-CS curriculum, but also perspectives and approaches. So really getting people to think in an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way. So looking at the Beecology technology, that's our computational backbone. So here are all of the tools that we have from the CS side of things. And again, using this as a foundation, and using the Beecology as a framework, and then using these computational tools as starting to fill in the framework, we can then start to develop the curriculum. And so our approach then is to use the citizen science component, right? So the scientific practices, they're engaging in the citizen science, right? They're able to collect the data themselves. They're able to look at data that previous years of previous groups of students have collected from different schools across the state. And then from the computer science side, we want the students to be able to design and implement these computational tools that are then going to be used by biologists to gather data. Again, from the computer science side, it's from a design problem to a product. From the science side of, or biology side of things, it's more formulating a hypothesis, and then analyzing data and coming up with some sort of conclusion. The key to this is that the software is modular, meaning that it can be used out of the box, or you could remove elements and create new elements, or you could create a new product altogether. And the way that we approach things is we wanted things to be generalizable, and so that we can use it out of the context of biology, right? So that any STEM discipline, this process could be used to integrate any STEM discipline with computational thinking. So what I mean, just to give you an example, so I mentioned the simulations that that I ran with, or that Liz Ryder ran as a part of our that integrated workshop that we had for high schools. So in terms of the plug and play, that's basically what the students were doing with that NetLogo version of things. They were just using the already created model to simulate effects of stressors or invasive species. So we would create, Liz created with her students, created the software that the students can run these simulations, and we've so we know the outcome ahead of time. Then, depending on the comfort level of the teacher, students could add new components to already existing simulations. So this is the add replace feature. And then the third, which is the highest level, is they can design an entirely new simulation. So what we're doing, again, it meets the needs of all teachers, right? The teachers that aren't comfortable can use the curriculum. Teachers that have a good background in computer science, or they take one of our workshops and are really good at developing these models, can then bring that into the classroom. So it's very flexible. Looking at things from the computer side, each one of our these computational tools can turn into, from the CS side, that it's used to develop curriculum around key concepts in computer science. So HTML and CSS and JavaScript in terms of the web app, right? And the way that the CS side of things was developed is that there are intro, what are called hacker versions. So the intro covers the basics, the hacker versions are advanced. And so if again, based on the comfort level of the teacher, and also the students are really good at computer science, that there are hacker versions of things that the students can use that are well advanced. So it sort of rambling on here, but the hacker version is meant to really push students and give students that are more advanced in the class the opportunity to push themselves as well. So just to give you some examples of some of the activities and lessons that we've developed here, this is a dichotomous key activity. And so thinking about, here's the biological problem, right? We need to figure out how we need to develop a tool to be able to ID these species. How is it that we're going to be able to ID these bumblebee species? And so there's a very simple activity where they're given the bumblebee species and they have to sort them in a logical way. And based on the way they sort them, they start to think about, okay, how would you develop an app that would do this? What elements would that app contain? So looking at computer science and that computational thinking more from a conceptual perspective. And then at the end, compare the method that the students have come up with the Beecology app itself, and talk about how the app was designed, the web app was designed versus what their design was. And they can think about design, again, more from the conceptual side of things. From the biology side, as I mentioned, there's hypothesis testing. So, using some of the visualization tools, such as the one shown here. So this is the heat map showing diversity. So the more red, so these boxes down here are higher bumblebee species diversity. These are low bumblebee species diversity. So the students may ask, or they may test the hypothesis that, or look at how bumblebee diversity has changed since the 1990s. So again, we have lessons developed. I know that certain species have declined, and so the students would walk through and see that decline for themselves. This is looking at the diversity, and we could talk about what is diversity. If we have 4 species, but we have a lot of one species, is that truly diverse, or should things be more even? In addition to using the visualization tools, the students could actually download data. So this is the hacker version from the biology side, download data and create pivot tables and then plot data to look at, to test to see whether there's a decline. Very similar to the graphs that I showed you earlier in the talk. The students can create those on their own to provide evidence for species decline. Looking at the bipartite graph that we have as a part of the visualization tools, remember we have the bumblebee species on this side, flower species on this side. This is fully interactive, so I can click on anything here and it will show me what, so if I click on this bumblebee species, it'll show me everything that it was visited in proportion of observations. So the thicker the bar, the more observations of that plant species. And so you can take a look at how species differ in their preferences. And you can see we have a lot of filters built in. So based on their behavior, are they collecting nectar or pollen? Their tongue length, are they a long tongue species or a short tongue species? The shape of the flower, is it a tubular or is it an open flower with no tube or a short tube? You can also filter based on color. And so you can imagine the students could ask a lot of questions. Do bumblebees prefer red flowers or blue flowers? And they can use this tool to understand and to test that hypothesis. From the computer science side of things, then they would learn how you would develop a tool like this. And so here's the problem. We need to present data on the bumblebee species and the flower species together. What would you do? Right? That's how you would flip things to the computer science side. So at this point, we have already developed, the computer science side is fully developed. The bio side at the end of this summer is going to be fully developed, but we have fully integrated units that are based on the biology and the computer science standards. So here are the topics that are covered. So each one of these topics has been integrated with computer science, and each one of these computer science key concepts has been integrated with something from this side. So if you want more information on the project itself, you can go to the BioCS Bridge website. We are, as I said, we're in the final stages of deploying our curriculum that we've developed, and you know, that should happen within the next few months. So we're very excited about that. And with that, I would like to thank everybody on the team. Right, so we had the four. The PI, which is Liz Ryder's the PI, and then we had the three co-PIs, but we had a number of teacher leaders that we trained initially. The second year of the project, they then trained other high school teachers, which we called those teacher integrators. All of these teachers are delivering this content in their class, collecting data on the students. We've collected data on the teachers, and this is rolled into a new grant that we're putting in at the middle school level. So we think we have a really good process for training teachers to do this integration. So that's the part of the grant that we've applied for. But you can see that, you know, there are a lot of computer science students, both at the graduate level and undergraduate level, that have helped the Beecology Project and also helped with the BioCS Bridge. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Who has questions? Stephen.
Great to hear your talk. This is really interesting. For me, I've been working with science teachers in the South Coast area here ever since I've joined the university here back in 2012, and I've slowly, but like over the last couple of years, have really integrated bringing citizen science projects into the classroom and into my classes, introducing teachers to various citizen science projects. And so for me, I've been stumbling upon these citizen science projects as I see them published, as I come across them. But for me to see the progression of how this originated in your own research and how you brought all of the team members together and how integrated and how you had to have this full team together to pull it together was really fascinating, just to kind of see how this project sort of developed over the years. And it sort of was self-serving initially, right? Like, you know, you didn't want to walk up and down all of these fields and sort of like, hey, let's get an army of people to do it. And then you thought, okay, now I've got this army of people to do it, but now we've got all this data. What can we do with this data? So this is a really fascinating story, and one that I think is a really great story to be able to tell for other, you know, to other teachers, to get teachers involved, but then get other folks involved too. So I appreciated the whole story. For me, I guess my question is, you know, so my experience in working with teachers and just in general with citizen science projects is that you really have to be really interested in the system right? You have to be interested in bees, you have to be interested in butterflies, you have to be interested in frogs or whatever to really get interested in doing this and to becoming involved, actually integrated and becoming involved in the citizen science project. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. And I know it's certainly, you know, part of the backstory and the reason why you got involved in this project about declining ecosystems and such. But I just wondered, what's your experience in working with high school teachers and high school students along their interest level of working with this specific system?
So I will say that, and maybe I've been lucky, but it's been very well received. And I'll say that the citizen science part of it is what's keeping it going, but doesn't necessarily need to be a part of the experience. You know, a lot of, so I have videos. The teachers have access to videos of bumblebees interacting with plants that they can use rather than going outside. And we've told the teachers, because one of some pushback that we've received is that they can't add anything new. They're already full with, like, they can't add anything onto their plate, which is completely understandable. But we've developed things so that it's a swap. You know, once they talk about environmental science or the environment in any way, they talk about ecosystems, evolution, that core content, there are elements of our curriculum that they could swap in and use in that way. So they don't necessarily have to be interested in bees per se. It's more when they're talking about and learning about ecosystems, they can use it as an example to convey the key concepts. And at the same time, to help to motivate it, they're using real data, right? Mm-hmm. Or they're looking at real systems that are in trouble. And in our experience, that's actually helped to motivate not just the students, but also the teachers to bring it into the classroom.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I think in my experience in working with teachers is having them find ways to already leverage things that they're doing in their own classrooms and to find connections with, like this example, right? Like you're already teaching, you know, ecosystem health. Well, here's a great model to bring in and show it as an example. And so that's a great way to approach that. What I've been trying to do is trying to have teachers not necessarily generate their own citizen science projects, but try and research what citizen science projects that are out there that they could fully integrate into a particular unit in their instruction along the way. Because it might be bees that gets one student in the classroom super excited, but it might be bats, or it might be turtles, or it might be frogs, right? And so looking at all of the different examples, I think is just fascinating. And I think I'm really interested to see where you go with the butterfly example as well. And maybe offline we can talk about how you integrated the details of how you integrated that with iNaturalist, because I think that's kind of a fascinating story as well.
Yeah, and I think that'll bring more students on board. And, you know, to be honest, I would do all the pollination systems, but the other bees are harder to ID, and iNaturalist doesn't have the resolution to be able to ID to species level, which is why we're not using it on the bumblebee side of things. But yeah, like we meet with the teachers and say one-on-one and ask, tell me about what you do. And really, even if it's not related to my side of things, the computer science side, we can figure out a way that they could bring in the computer science into whatever they're doing. And I think that the middle school project that I mentioned at the end is going to do that. We sit down with the teachers, doesn't matter any STEM, any area of STEM, and say, okay, what are some key concepts? And then think about how we would bring the computer science in and integrate that together so that the teachers is dictating how and what's integrated.
That's great. Thank you. I don't want to take all your time here. A couple of my students actually have questions too, so I want to give them a chance to ask. But yeah,
of course. Yeah.
James, you're next up.
Hi, great presentation. I'm really excited to hear about this kind of work because I'm a computer science teacher at Somerset Berkeley High School, and I'm really interested in finding ways to cross computer science over into other disciplines, into the classrooms of other teachers. And we had an effort in my district to try to do this at the different grade levels before the pandemic hit, and the pandemic really knocked us off course with that effort. So what I've been trying to do is to find opportunities to do proof of concept stuff and show that we should pick up that effort and get it going again. What I like about what you're doing is I have a current effort working with art teachers to produce things, to engineer microcontrollers and lights that are being integrated with fashion. So it's a fashion design class that I'm having my students in CS work with them. But what I like about this is it shows examples of using CS to work with in the sciences to understand things. So where the goal is understanding rather than just building something. So it really complements what we're already doing. And I would love to be able to reach out to biology teachers at my school and see if they would and use something like this to get them to collaborate with me on that sort of effort. So my question to you is this in a state where I could see what you're doing and actually bring it to a teacher and try to start to form a collaboration there to plan for, say, next year? If I were to approach somebody, could I say, hey, I've looked into this and maybe we should talk about implementing this next year? Is that feasible?
Yes, it is. So we have everything, especially from the computer science side of things. We have everything ready to go, and it's even on the developer version of the website. We just haven't deployed it yet, but we're waiting for the biology side to get completed. And as I said, I'm the biology side, and then there's the computer science side has 50, it's like an army. And so anyway, I'm not making excuses, but I hope by the end of the summer to catch up from the bio side, but certainly the computer science is available. And I'll say that we've had the most success with the computer modeling, bringing that into the biology. And I know that I've talked to Liz about other systems, right? Different levels of organization, bringing in the model, and using the biology as a framework, just in other contexts. Mm-hmm. So we're looking to collect data on how effective what we're doing actually is, both from the student and also, working with teachers. Does that help them to think about and integrate more computer science into the classroom? So yeah, the answer to your question is yes, that it is ready. And yes, I'd love to have you use some of this and help us to collect some data to see how effective it is, and also suggest changes too, right? So we have a team, but I look at this as a work in progress, and we're going to, things are going to evolve. And so that would be great. Yes.
Now this is on my radar. I will be in contact with you.
Excellent. Good. Thank you.
Great. Rachel.
Great, thank you. That was fascinating. I really appreciate how you laid out the evolution of the project. I'm curious, you mentioned early on that you were checking the accuracy or confirming the submissions. Mm-hmm. I know some people, I'm a big fan of citizen science. I know some people are concerned about accuracy. I wonder if you could just describe your experience with that, or did you find adding more criteria increase the accuracy?
Right. So excellent question. And I think, so the one thing that increased accuracy is we moved from just using still images to videos, because the videos you can scrub frame by frame and you can get the angles that you need to increase the accuracy of the ID. The other part is that, starting with the abdomen, like there's a sort of systematic way of doing the ID where you start with the abdomen and the thorax and the head. That has increased the accuracy as well. I have access to everything that comes into the database. So the computer science team has made it so that I can log on and see everything that's in and correct it if it comes in. And so everything that's on the website, I vetted and is accurate. And I'll say that what comes in, it's probably about 80%. Well, if they've taken my workshop, it's 95 to 100. If they haven't, it's still 90 to 95% accuracy with our manual ID. we hope that with the butterflies, because iNaturalist is involved, that accuracy will go up, because I think that iNaturalist does a pretty good job. But I'm still seeing everything that comes in, and the plants have been more challenging. But now with iNaturalist, we're hoping that what comes in, there'll be a higher level of accuracy. But I would say that it's pretty good, considering that they're looking at things both from the animal side and the plant side at species level. Bumblebees are relatively easy, and the butterflies I think will be easier as well. But yeah, that's extremely important to vet. But looking at as I said, looking at my research through very rigorous field surveys, what's coming up in Beecology matches what I am finding through more rigorous experimental protocols. And so that is reassuring, and to the point where when there are species that I haven't encountered, I look at those and try to find where they are occurring naturally to get more data on them, and then they make it to the list that I showed you. So that's really helped to move my research forward, not just with the data, but figuring out where species are, figuring out new plant species that I didn't encounter during my field surveys, that type of thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hamza.
Thank you. First of all, wonderful presentation. I had the privilege to work with Dr. Witzig this semester as a teaching assistant, and had a perspective on citizen science, and especially teachers' perspective. And one of the biggest thing, and I think one Dr. Witzig already mentioned, but one thing that I've heard teachers talking about is the time that it takes for them to work in these projects, especially from a student perspective. Like maybe, like we introduced a lot of ideas about citizen science, and one of the biggest thing that kept coming back from the teachers was maybe they have to take kids out in the field, collect those data, but then have to come back in the classroom to make sure they know how they're entering this data. So my question is that how was that experience of building those apps? Because you mentioned that you had some students as well who were part of the process. So I just wanted to know, how did that process work for you to make it more user friendly? Like few of the teacher exam mentioned they have like 9 different sections to teach. So it's hard for them to implement these ideas if they're taking a lot of their time. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that.
So good question. As I mentioned before, that what we've developed is really a swap in rather than an in addition to. And going out to the field to actually collect data is only a small portion of what our curriculum has to offer. Certainly that's the fun part, and it really engages the students, and is a good lead in to talking about a lot of those biological concepts, but isn't necessary. There are things that are doable in class where they, even if it's walking through the app or talking about the decline of these species and what they look like, and going through that dichotomous key activity, they can then go home and try out the app if they wanted to. So I look at the participation in the citizen science as from different levels. If they go home and tell their parents to plant some things on my list because they learned about what these species need, or they understand at that level, that's a part of the citizen science. So it covers all of those goals that I talked about. But that's only there if they only need to participate in the project proper if they have the time and they wanted to do that part of it. But there's a lot more to it than just that citizen science part. It's as I said, that it's more the real world problem that's the framework rather than the citizen science. The citizen science is used to help us figure out how to solve the real world problem, but it's that real world problem of pollinator decline or plant pollinator system degradation that's the framework. And they're learning about the global problem, and they can help us to fix that problem through citizen science, or understand how we're going about doing that. So I think maybe it was a bit misleading for me to say that the citizen science is the framework. It's more that that conservation is the global problem that serves as the framework or the motivation for both the biology and the computer science side of things.
Thank you, thank you. And I'm pretty sure that you might already have this information, but NSTAs have a huge section of series on citizen science section, and hearing you talk about it and how excellent this project has been, I think it will be a great idea to have this in that series. So just a quick thought I wanted to share with you.
So sorry, is that for the conference for this year coming up?
They overall have a citizen science section where they upload new projects. I can share some of those details with you, and if you opt to choose, you can share your ideas, and then they publish it out for the teachers if they want to use that resource.
Okay, because I know that the group has presented at NSTS in the past, but certainly send me the information. I'd
Yeah,
appreciate
but
it.
they usually do like 1 page or 2 pages from a practitioner's perspective, and
Yeah.
I got to use that new this semester, and Dr. Witzik introduced me to that site. So I thought that this project might be wonderful idea for teachers to know.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Great. Nazia?
Thank you. First of all, it was a great presentation. I had a question. As you mentioned, this project is for high schoolers, young learners, and maybe some portion of it can be used for middle schoolers. Do you have any idea which portion can be used for elementary schools, or maybe, or with some little activities, as they have very little time for science classes? Any idea if you have?
Yeah,
Would
so
love to hear.
yeah, great question. I have presented some of this at the elementary level. So my son and daughter in elementary school, and so I went into their class and gave a version of what I talked about today. I think the computer science part of it might be some of the basic modeling might be doable. And certainly from the biology side, using the technology and just understanding the basic concepts, I think it's there, more conceptual. We haven't, I do think it's doable. And again, it would be a swap in. So I know that my son and daughter, they always have a lesson on bees, right? So in that lesson on bees, it's always honeybees, and bringing in the native bees and these systems and expanding it. This elements of that part of it could be brought in and swapped in, or replace the honeybee, bringing in the computer science. And so again, it would be meeting with the teacher and just see what they're covering, and looking for what I call these integration points, where we could bring in our curriculum or a version of it. But I mean, happy to talk more about, you know, the elementary level and trying to bring it in, if you were interested. But my experience has been limited to my kids' classes, so I wouldn't say that I've worked at the elementary level, like across schools, like I have with high schools. So, okay, thanks.
Great. Stephen?
All right, I've got a biology question for you now. So
Mhm.
the early on, when you're sort of setting the stage for the importance of the work, you showed that graph where you said there's some species that are decreasing, but then there's other species that are increasing. And so in terms of sort of the pollination systems that you talked about on the plant and animal side, are you seeing the species that are increasing? Are you seeing more non-native or invasive species in that mix? Like, do you see like a change, like from the native species to to invasive species, or have you not looked that deep yet?
Right. No, I definitely have. So if you know, just last night I gave a talk to a group, and that's where I go into this into a much more detail. So I gave you here's what you need to know to get into understand the education side and the motivation.
Okay.
But invasive species are a major problem. You know, not only do they take up space that could be used with the native plant species, like through the competition's a major deal, both from the plant side, and then honeybees are non-native competitors. And so there's a major issue with honeybees taking the resources from native bees and contributing to their decline as well. And so what's interesting is that some of the species in decline are surviving because of these non-native species. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out what are the native plant partners that should be going with this species. So the non-native plants have pushed away the natives, and I'm trying to reconnect them. The reason for that is because it turns out that the animals that use the plants, so that eat the seeds, birds don't want to eat non-native seeds, the butterflies don't want to use non-native plants as host plants. And so even though we're feeding the animals, right, the pollinator, we're losing the connection with the rest of the ecosystem by not having those native plants present. And I've got a lot of data to show that this is the case, and that when you remove things like purple loosestrife, you've got natives coming in, and all the species in decline are moving in and using those native plants where they wouldn't use the non-native, right? So the non-native plants are used by honeybees because they're non-native, but also the common species are using all these invasive plants. And people think that, oh, look at all these bees, that must be having a positive impact, when in reality, it's thousands of one species when there should be 5 or 6 there. And so educating people on diversity versus abundance is a lot of what I do on a daily basis, and what I really try to emphasize in the talks that I give.
Gotcha. Oh no, that's great. It's good to hear, because I think that's the hook that I try and get like science teachers to think about in terms of when they're talking about ecosystem health, like thinking about it in terms of non-native species and native species, because this is things that kids can do when they just go out in their backyard. Like, right, what do you choose to plant around your house versus what's just growing in the field behind your house that you view as weeds, right? So
yeah, so I'll say, and that brings up something. So in the schools, what I'm trying to do is to get them to put in these habitats, and I've been somewhat successful. And once they do, they can collect data, but they can also use it just as a teaching tool, right, to understand these systems and to see how, and I do this in my workshops with members of the community. Is I say, go around and tell me what plant species you think is the best or the most pollinator friendly, and inevitably it's one that all the common species are using. And then we get down to the species level, and I say, okay, which one is the species in decline using, or it gets them to appreciate things at the species level, which is really missing. And that could be brought into the classroom as well if they had a small plot and put in some native plants. And I know at Nipmuc they've done that in a number of other schools, and they're now using it as a teaching tool when they get to the ecology evolution, adaptation. And a lot of the curriculum that we have would fit with the creation of these habitats at schools, or at least being able to access an area that would have these habitats.
So that's great. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Hamza.
I just wanted to ask you about, because you have mentioned a couple of times about the workshops that you've done, and the vast years of experience and number of workshops that you have been doing. I just wanted to know if you can talk more about it, that how do you approach those workshops, and especially from a teacher's perspective, because we work with teachers directly on this too. So I'm curious if you have any tips for us, that how you get them more motivated, because you mentioned if they take your workshop, they're like a 99% accuracy. So I'd like to know more about that how can we learn from your workshops as science educators when we are going in our classrooms too?
Yeah, so it's a lot of hands-on, which is always a good idea, but I have some key points that I want them to see, or some key points that I want to make with these workshops. And so the first thing is to get them to think about diversity, like to look at what's visiting the flowers at the species level, and to understand pollination. And so I get them to go out, and I give them different tasks. So they're I'll say, go out and tell me which species has the most things visiting flowers, and they'll go out and they'll come back, we'll talk about it, and I'll say, okay, which ones do you think bumblebees like? And then they'll go out and they'll tell me, and then I'll say, okay, well, which ones do, how many species do we see, bumblebee species do we see on each species? And part of this too is me teaching them what to look for. And so in the workshops, I'm teaching them to use the app and also how to identify the bumblebee species. And so I typically start off with a bit of classroom, here's the system, here's why we're doing what we're doing to get them motivated. And then here's what we look for. And I tell them to go out and take some short videos, which they would later incorporate into the app. And they come in and we go through the video frame by frame. And I have a sheet that I use to get them to ID. And then they try to figure out what they have based on the sheet. And then eventually that goes from the sheet to then bringing the video into the app and teaching them how to use the app to collect the data to send to me. So that's typically what I do with the workshops. And I've done the workshops with all the teachers that were involved in the project. We went to Tower Hill Botanic Garden, and we walked around and we spent a day just going through learning how to use the app and appreciating the diversity, understanding, or being able to ID the different species. And at the end, I turned it into a game, and I say, okay, whoever can find the most species wins a prize type thing. And they go out and they, they'll look around and try to win the prize type thing. So.
Thank you. So it's like a day-long workshops, or is it shorter?
The teachers was day long because there were other elements that I incorporated in, because I gave them the whole background content, and then we went through the Beecology website, and then we went to the app, and then I taught them, like we went outside to look at things interacting. Typically they're no more than 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, when I give a workshop to a conservation group or through the library or whoever I'm giving the talk to.
Thank you so much.
If you want, I give these all the time at Dartmouth Natural Resources Trust right beside campus. I'll probably have 2 or 3 this year. I'm happy to have you join one of those and see what I do. I tend to not, I read the crowd, and then I don't have, I have ideas, but I don't have a formal structure to it, because depending on the crowd, I change things up. Because I can, at this point, can tell if they're going to be engaged or not with what I'm doing.
No, I would love to be a part of it, and I was just, and this is the reason why I was asking, just to see that there's a chance that I might be involved in a couple of courses over the summer, and I was thinking how we can inculcate that, where we can have those teachers listen directly from you who are working in the field and having those impact. That might be something very useful for the teachers to.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, I could run it. I'd be happy to run a workshop for teachers if you wanted to organize one. Yeah.
We'll definitely be in touch with you. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, you're welcome.
Rachel.
I was wondering, you mentioned the ratio of 1 biologist to an army of computer scientists.
That's right. Yes.
Is that due to the complexity of the app and everything that you're trying to do with modeling, or do you think that's standard for something like this?
No, I don't. I think that I could use a lot more help, and I think the development of those computational tools takes a lot of time, and so things have been pulled over to that side of things. But I'll say that there are a lot of activities and curriculum from the biology side that I could use help with, and even I'm not coming at things from the education side of things, and so just finding somebody to develop formal lesson plans has been a challenge from my side, because we need a student that would be able to do so at the high school level, that would understand the biology. We already have students from the computer science side, and that's why things have moved along more quickly, because they could easily take their activities and get the lesson plans and all the supporting information that you need to, all the support that you need for the lesson plan. So I think it should be less in balance, but I don't need an army that size to do the biology, certainly, but more would be good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Eleanor.
Hi. So I was an elementary computer science teacher before joining the program, and I have done some similar kinds of things with modeling infection, traveling through populations, and having students build those kind of models mostly on Scratch. But I guess I see that there would be a lot of connections to what you're talking about and to this project. And you had mentioned kind of bringing it to the middle school level and kind of that as a pilot, maybe you're working on. I guess I was wondering about the elementary school level and your thoughts about feasibility.
I do think that the Starlogo, because it's like puzzle pieces, is at some level doable at the elementary level. But Liz Ryder is really the modeling expert. And based on what I've seen, I think it's possible, but she'd be the one to talk to about. I think that some of these will be available, the tutorials, the Starlogo tutorials for teachers, when they're available. If you look at those, I think you get a better sense of what may be doable at the elementary level. The NetLogo, and even using the simulations with NetLogo, I definitely think is upper middle to high school, just because there's a lot going on. But
I also ask because having been an elementary school teacher and working with them for a while, I find that they really struggle they are responsible for teaching the Massachusetts digital literacy and computer science standards. So they have to bring computer science into the classroom, even if they're maybe not. And I guess that some of what you were talking, not all of it, I think applies to elementary school, but some of what you were talking about, I think might be a helpful way to empower teachers to integrate computer science and digital literacy, which they're supposed to be doing, but struggle with.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of what we have and could be used to make teachers feel more comfortable about computer science. As I said, we have things that range from very basic to those hacker advanced level, and we did that on purpose. And I know we have tutorials with the modeling, for sure. We have tutorials on how to use the NetLogo that teachers could use that are easy to understand. And I think that would make them feel more comfortable. And then obviously that would make it more likely they would bring it into the classroom. If is that what you mean in terms of the teacher education? Yeah.
Great. In the comments, Emmanuel asked a very practical question for anybody who wants to do this. Do you have advice for how to not get stung going out and watching bees?
Yeah, excellent question. So you're not contacting the bees at all. I do. And if you want to join my lab, I can show you how to do that safely. But all you're doing is taking a 10-second video, and you're usually a foot away from the bees on the flower. And to be honest, when bees are on flowers, they're very focused on getting the nectar. They don't care that you're there. I put them in vials and show, when I'm giving these workshops, I'll put them in vials and show people so they can see what the species looks like close up. And if I let them out of the vial, they go right back to the flower. They're not coming to sting me. Wasps are more likely to do that, and wasps look like bees and they give bees a bad rap. But the bees are only aggressive if you're messing with their colony. So they're defending their nest. Other than that, they're unless you grab it or step on it, it's not going to sting you. So but you're taking a video, so you're standing a foot away. If you look at the Beecology website, I have a tutorial on how to take a good bee video, and it starts with stand a foot away from the bee, with your phone. So.
So I love that you have a video on how to take a good video. That's fast. That's
yes.
That's right. So I got another question. I didn't raise my hand, but there's a nice lull there. I just jumped in. But I'm wondering with the integration of iNaturalist and iNaturalist over the last 10 years or so has just exploded. In the AI functionality of iNaturalist is just amazing. Well, I remember when it first came out, I was thinking, it might not even be 10 years now, but when it seems like it, but when it first came out, it was a little lackluster, but now like you go on there and I'm just amazed every day at the resourcefulness of it. And I'm wondering are you thinking, at least on the bio side for your project, are you thinking about crowdsourcing some of the bio identification similar to how iNaturalist does to help you like check the all the, the incoming data that's coming in, right? Like instead of needing it just go to your eyes, each data set, each video, the accuracy of those checking those. Are you thinking about doing something with crowdsourcing like iNaturalist does?
Well, so yeah, so the iNaturalist, the reason that it's so good is because it has those experts that are feeding them, like involved in the machine learning process.
Yeah.
At this point, it's manageable, but I hope to expand this project to the west, where it's, or even north, like there are different bee species. So we've got the template, and then if we decide to move this out of New England, then we would need other experts. And certainly if we get into the other bees and the butterflies, I would consider bringing other experts on board. The difference between Beecology and everything else that's out there is that I am concerned with interaction. Everybody else just wants to ID the species and where it is. I want to know what those bees and butterflies are actually doing, because that's the ecology. And, not to go too much into the politics, but the USDA and it's all taxonomists that are driving pollinator conservation. They're not considering ecology at all. So what they'll do is go in and put out bee bowls, kill and pin, and then go back and measure vegetation. Rather than looking at what the bees are actually doing, they'll just correlate the two. And so what I'm doing and what I hope will spread is, and what we're developing is an interaction database. In Europe, they have their Citizen Science Project. It's all about interactions, and they have this great interaction database where you can look at plants or animals, and they've even combined different databases on interactions. We're nowhere near that yet. So the next phase of this project is to look at what plants are interacting, or what animals are interacting with the plants that are being pollinated. And so we can start to rebuild these network, I want to create an interaction database. And to do that I'm going to have to bring in experts to help me with that process, and certainly the ID portion of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's the key. And that's sort of, I think the underlying like message in your talk too, is like, this takes collaboration, to really do.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, related to the interactions part, I actually took some pictures of some bumblebees on flowers the other day, and I post things on iNaturalist all the time, and I go on iNaturalist, and I haven't posted these yet, but I was actually debating, what do I post here? Do I focus on the bee and
Right.
label it as the bee, or the flower was amazing too, or I call it the flower? And that's right at the nexus of what you're talking about here. It's really the interaction that's important there, right? It's not just
Yes.
the bee on its own, or the flower that it was on its own. And so right now in iNaturalist, that's not, you know what I mean? You can put it in a comment, like, oh, also found on this flower, but
Exactly.
You're not identifying two things at once in there, and it is a limitation. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not treating it as it's a unit. It's
right.
Though it's
Yeah.
We have to treat it as one, not as two separate things. And to be honest, the plant side of the equation is completely ignored. So just getting people aware of the native plant is the pollination, which involves the plant, is the key component here. That's why losing the bees is so important. It's not just losing the one species, it's losing its functional role as a pollinator, which is then supporting all these other species. But that, for whatever reason, that gets lost in the mix. And I think it has to do with the focus on agriculture and crop pollination, where it's food for one species, right? So it makes it very streamlined versus all these systems and supporting other things. It's too complicated, I think.
Yeah.
Related
to crowdsourcing too, and then I'll let Hamza ask his question again. But I think we should talk and collaborate some more, because I think what we do with teachers, I'm working with lots of teachers, and I'm working with lots of teachers on helping them develop meaningful integrated lesson plans for their classrooms.
Yeah.
And if you need help with lesson planning to get this work out, I think there's a way we can crowdsource this with teachers, right?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Have teachers help develop the lesson plans that make sense for them in their classrooms.
Yeah.
And then making these available. And I think that's the key, having curriculum materials available for teachers that they can easily see themselves using and adapting, I think is what's going to help get teachers using these in their classroom. And so I think like what Hamza was saying earlier, I think we could help with that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great, because we do have from the computer science side on the website, we already have everything. So I just have to take the lesson and drop it, and it's already, when we launch it, it's already going to be all nice and populated and organized.
Yeah.
It's just getting to that point where we can start dropping things that is a bit slower than the computer science side. So thank you for that. Yeah,
Right.
good.
Okay, we'll let Hamza ask the last question.
Oh, I was about to say that I promise it's my last question.
Yes, it is.
So that's just the environmental educator in me is jumping out. I just wanted, because you mentioned that this is where you implement where there's environmental connection as well. So I was just going through the website to see the data analysis side. So I was curious if you can just briefly talk about it, that data analysis tool, does it have that environmental aspect to it, where the students or teachers can go in and have the connection of those environmental sites as well? Thank you.
So, sorry, do you mean from the environmental side, are you talking about the interaction with the plant, or what do you mean by environmental side?
I'm just curious to know, because if this is the data there that is talking about bees, the flowers and everything,
Right.
but there is environmental connection too with all those things. There's a huge impact on the environmental side. So I just wanted to know, does that cross section in that data analysis side, or is it specifically just focusing on the bees or just the flower side as well?
Okay, yeah, I understand. So in terms of the app and the visualization tools, it's really focused on the bee flower interactions at the species level. But if you look at the modeling side of it, we've created a model where we have the bees interacting with the flowers, and then there are mice interacting with the plants, like in terms of the seeds that they eat, and then there are hawks that are eating the mice. And so you can look at, if you start to play with the abundance of one of those interactors, how does it affect the system? So if we reduce the bees, then we get fewer seeds and we start to see hawks go down, so that the student can see the connection between bird decline and bee decline. There are a lot of steps and that everything is connected. So it's system level thinking. That's in the modeling side of things. And that's, if you look at the Beecology website, the third one down is the modeling, and there are some looking at effects of invasive species, and then there's one looking at the what I just said, where you've got hawks and mice and plants and bees.
Thank you. I just want to say this was amazing session. Thank you so much for your
thank you for the questions. Yeah.
And thank you once again for speaking to us today. It's been super interesting, and I can't wait to add some more of these plants to my butterfly garden.
Yes, I'll let you know. I can tell you where to get them if you have problems. So
perfect. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. It was nice chatting with everyone and meeting everyone. And I hope we can work together in the future at some level. So have a great week.